Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. So let's just jump right in, shall we? Today we're taking a super fascinating deep dive into the true anthropological history of human dress and decoration, based on a brilliantly researched historical text. We are going to completely unpack how our ancestors went from their natural state all the way to the complex, hyper-fashion-driven societies we live in today. Let me start off by asking you a question, and it sounds pretty simple. Why on earth did humans invent clothes? Honestly, if you're like most of us, you probably already have a totally practical answer popping into your head.
Well, get ready for a pretty massive paradigm shift. The modern assumption is almost always, oh, we invented clothes to stay warm, protect ourselves, and, cover up for modesty. But the historical text we're unpacking today argues the exact opposite. Early humans didn't start wearing things to hide their bodies. They did it for adornment, magical protection, and honestly to actively attract attention. It was all about looking good, not covering up.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the drive to decorate, then move into paint, tattoos, and scars. After that, we'll look at body modification and jewelry, uncover the true origins of clothing, and finally, wrap up with the psychology of modesty. All right, Section 1, the drive to decorate and its animal kingdom origins. Right off the bat, our source makes this really powerful point. The desire to, produce an agreeable impression, that's a fundamental drive we see all over the animal kingdom. Just think about peacocks. Humans basically just took that instinct and elevated it. In our absolute baseline state, like in early primitive village environments, humans lived in a state of complete nudity, and it was totally natural. It was habitual, completely harmless. So those very first steps away from that baseline, they absolutely weren't about hiding the body. They were entirely about decorating it. Moving on to Section 2, paint, tattoos, and scars, the human canvas. Way before anyone was weaving fabrics, humans actually started decorating themselves with temporary paints. We're talking colored earths, red ochre mixed with animal fat, things like that. But eventually, people wanted something more permanent. Take the traditional, intricate facial tattoos of Maori women in New Zealand, for example. The word tattoo actually comes from the Polynesian word ta, which literally means to strike. And these permanent, often really painful marks were created to signify valor, dignity, and even to evoke fear in enemies, or mutual attraction between the sexes. And as civilizations evolved, these decorations got incredibly specific. In India, tattoos functioned almost like a permanent visual passport. Brahmin women, for instance, might feature a lotus or a peacock to signify royalty and religious devotion. Meanwhile, lower caste women might use a fish or a spider to symbolize fertility and good luck. Early tribes even used crude drawings primarily for identification, basically out of this intense fear of abduction. So literally every single dot and line had a profound, specific social meaning. But here's a question. What if your skin was too dark for ink to show up clearly? Well, that's exactly where scarification came in. It served the exact same cultural purpose as tattooing, but it relied on texture instead of color. And the reasons behind it were deeply, deeply significant. People used scarification to create tribal identity marks, to literally record the number of enemies a warrior had slain in battle, or even to serve as physical charms against illness and evil spirits. It was all about taking the invisible social world and making it highly visible on the skin. Section 3, body modification and jewelry, altering the body. So, once humans mastered altering their skin, they started altering the actual physical shape of their bodies. And this evolutionary timeline is absolutely crucial to understand. You really have to view human dress not as some sudden invention to cover up, but as a long, unbroken sequence. We went from painting to tattooing, and then to actual physical mutilation, like boring holes in ears or noses or chipping teeth into serrated cones. Then came jewelry, and only after all of that entire process did clothing actually arrive. That transition from mutilation to jewelry is just fascinating. Over time, as extreme physical mutilations gradually faded out of practice, that deep desire for adornment totally remains. So humans began utilizing the holes they had already bored, in heavily dilated earlobes or pierced septums to hang external objects. They started out simple, with shells, animal teeth, and bone fragments. But as soon as metallurgy was discovered, those organic materials were quickly swapped out for copper, iron, silver, and gold. So at its core, jewelry is really just the civilized successor to primitive body modification. Which brings us to Section 4, the true origins of clothing, adornment over cover. When early humans finally began wearing items that you or I might actually recognize as clothes, like a simple string girdle made of grass, it absolutely wasn't to hide anything. It was essentially just a larger piece of jewelry designed specifically to draw the eye to the body. Over time, local customs developed their own highly specific, and sometimes totally different, rules about what those garments meant. Take the historical dress of young Nayar women, for example. Their regional custom involved very specific inner and outer garments around the loins, but left the upper body entirely exposed. To foreigners, that might have seemed completely immodest, but within our own culture, that was the absolute definition of decency. And honestly, these historical customs totally shatter our modern preconceptions. The source text reveals this wild fact: in some Indian castes, keeping your upper body bare was actually a strict requirement to show respect. No way, right? But it's true. If you encountered an elder or someone of higher status, you were legally and socially obligated to take off your upper garment. Exposing the chest was a sign of deep reverence. That is literally the exact opposite of modern Western modesty norms. Finally, Section 5, the psychology of modesty, a learned byproduct. So this begs a massive question. If clothing wasn't originally invented to cover our shame, where in the world did this overwhelming human concept of modesty actually come from? Let's look at how early psychological theorists like Havelock Ellis defined it. They described modesty as an almost instinctive fear prompting concealment. But here is the absolute key takeaway from the text. It is not an innate biological instinct. It's a secondary trait. It developed entirely as a byproduct, way after clothing and adornment were already widely adopted for all those other reasons we just talked about. To explain exactly how that happened, the text highlights Professor James's brilliant disgust theory. It states, modesty is the outgrowth of our disapproval of immodesty in others. Think about it like this. Early societies developed a habit of wearing certain ornaments and clothes, right? Usually for magic or attraction. Once that habit is smoothly running, our attention just kind of withdraws from it. It's normal. But when someone suddenly breaks that habit, when they appear without the expected clothing, it literally shocks the group. We feel upset. We feel disgusted. So modesty, at the end of the day, is essentially societal peer pressure. It's our learned disgust when someone violates the established fashion habits of the tribe. The source wraps up with this incredibly profound thought. The modern fashion is a child of modern civilization. Nudity in itself is harmless. The text basically argues that from a purely objective, anthropological standpoint, there is absolutely nothing inherently wrong or shameful about the human body. Prudery and shame, they are completely artificial constructs. They've just been layered on top of us over millennia of evolving social habits, judgments, and that deep, primitive desire to decorate and distinguish ourselves. So I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. If everything we've unpacked today is true, if modesty is really just a learned byproduct of civilization, how much of your wardrobe is actually driven by the fear of societal judgment? And how much is still driven by that ancient, primitive desire to just put on some paint and look good? It definitely makes you think a little differently about getting dressed tomorrow morning, doesn't it? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.